Hello, it's Dr. Cindy again with this week's mental health moment. At various times in the course of our lives, we tend to reflect back on the past to assess and evaluate the decisions we made, the actions we took, and the effect that those had. These often become a springboard for setting goals for the future in order to hopefully improve upon whatever ways we view ourselves or our lives as falling short of how we would like things to be. This type of reflection is particularly common as one year comes to a close and another is beginning, as we often think of a new year as a fresh start and an opportunity to bring about desired changes. Today, I'm going to talk about regrets. Regrets occur when we feel badly about something we did or didn't do, either because that was hurtful to someone else or because it caused a negative outcome for us in some way. Often regret comes with an assumption that if only we had acted differently in the past, our current lives would be significantly better than we experience them to be. Sometimes we can become so fixated on what we see as a major failing on our part that we think we will forever be adversely affected by the repercussions of that behavior. In doing so, we essentially impose a life sentence on ourselves for that perceived transgression, with the implication that we can never have whatever it is we feel we've lost or missed out on because of our past decisions. Casting our potential future in such a light is not only incredibly painful, but it's also unnecessarily limiting. Of course, there's no rewind button that enables us to go back in time and take different steps than the ones we took. But I propose that we don't need a do-over in order to still be able to have what we think we've missed out on in some way. Our capacity to recognize this depends on the particular regret that we have and on how specifically we define its impact. For example, if you regret breaking up with someone you were with in college, and years later that person is married with children and has created a happy life for themselves, it's true that you probably aren't going to be with that person. And if you decide that means you've missed out on happiness because of that, well, that pretty much will doom you to be unhappy. But what if what is lacking in your life isn't actually that specific person, but the emotional experience that you enjoyed with him or her? Then it is absolutely possible for you to have that again in your life, because you can be with someone who makes you feel special or loved or connected, or whatever aspects of that past relationship you regret losing and want in your life now. Sometimes people have regrets about educational choices or career decisions they've made, or experiences like traveling that they didn't take the opportunity to pursue when they were younger. Again, rather than fixating on that specific thing, it can be helpful to think about the salient elements of those paths not taken in order to understand their significance to you. Start by asking yourself how you think your life would be different if you had taken a different path. I'd be happy now isn't a sufficient answer to this question. That's a false conclusion that comes from that problem-solving mechanism of the brain. Let me explain why. If you're not happy in your current life, and you aren't sure what to do to feel better, your brain will work on getting to the bottom of this problem in order to resolve it. Once it has exhausted all here and now explanations for your unhappiness, it will go back in time to try to figure out where things went wrong that led to you being unhappy now. So it will scan through past events and experiences looking for clues. When it comes across unresolved hurts, it thinks it has found a match. Aha, that made me unhappy, so that must be why I'm unhappy. And that's how a regret is born. That past situation is seen as the cause for your present discontent, which leads to the conclusion that, oh, if only I had done or hadn't done, fill in the blank, I would be happy. In fact, it doesn't even matter whether or not there objectively is a clear, direct link that connects that past issue to your current distress. Your brain will just connect the dots so it has an explanation, which it then presents to you as a solution. But that's just your brain making stuff up. So when you examine a regret, it is important to really try to connect to the essence of what now appeals to you about the unchosen path and where you think it would have led you. Really try to get below the initial explanations that come to mind to see what's in your heart. For example, what is it about not getting a degree that bothers you? Is it truly a barrier to advancing as far as you would like to in your job? If so, there are plenty of steps you can still take right now to resolve that as a challenge in your life. Conversely, have you enjoyed a successful career without a degree, but you feel inferior to your colleagues because they went to college? That requires a very different type of action in order for you to reach a solution about that regret. Or maybe you didn't go to college because the path you chose deviated from the ones your parents wanted you to take. So you feel you've disappointed them by doing what was right for you. If that's the case, addressing this challenge is best served by working on that internal emotional dynamic, not by enrolling in a degree program. That is why it is so important to really examine what the particular underlying concern is in order to guide you in what the appropriate action or steps might be. Otherwise, you might pursue a solution that doesn't really actually solve the problem. Broadening your view in this way and exploring what it is deep down that feels lacking or in need of resolution creates much more potential for you to figure out a course of action to take so that you can create whatever it is that you feel is absent in your life, or address the psychological factors that are causing you to perceive things in that way. When you get to the heart, literally, of the regret, that can be your compass for pointing you in the direction that is right for you. The possibilities for that are endless once we free ourselves of the belief that it is our decision from the past that needs to be corrected. That is the only thing we cannot change because it's over and done with. So we will always come to a dead end when we think that is what needs to be different in our lives. One important thing to recognize about regrets is that we judge ourselves for past decisions based on information that typically wasn't available to us at the time. Hindsight is 20/20, but foresight isn't. When we look back on situations in the past, we have a perspective and clarity about them that we didn't have before because we now see how things played out. At the time that we're making that decision, we can't possibly foresee the entire trajectory that will unfold from it. People often say, oh, if I knew back then what I know now, I would do things differently. But we can only know what we know at the time that we are making a decision. And the experiences that derive from our decisions and actions are actually what facilitate increased knowledge and potentially better discernment in the future. We can't just know everything we need to know. We have to go through some things to get there. Let's take a simple example of being out at a new restaurant. You're looking over the menu, trying to decide what to order for your meal. There are two particular entrees that catch your eye. Both sound delicious, and you find it difficult to choose between them. Eventually, you decide and place your order. Your dinner comes, and it is absolutely fabulous. It is one of the best meals you've ever had, and you savor every bite. When you are done eating and reflect on your experience, you are likely to say, I'm so glad I picked that. In that case, you feel very good about the decision you made because the outcome of it was a positive one. Now let's go back to that very same scenario, except this time your dinner comes and it really is a disappointment. For whatever reason, it isn't what you had been hoping for, and you end the meal feeling quite dissatisfied. As you push your plate away and reflect on your experience, what are you likely to say? Wish I had ordered that other entree. In that case, you regret the decision you made because the outcome of it was a negative one. Regret can only occur retrospectively because it comes from not being happy with how things turned out. Otherwise, there's no reason to regret. But we draw false conclusions because in many cases, we can't really know what would have resulted from making a different decision, only what we think would have happened. In this case, if you didn't like the meal you picked, then you assume you would have liked the other one better. That's all speculation. It's also possible the other entree would have been disappointing as well. Or what if that other meal would have given you food poisoning? Well, from that perspective, the choice you made was actually pretty good. Then you'd be saying, thank God I didn't pick that other dinner. We can't know all of the potential results or repercussions of the various decisions we are given to make in life. And that means we can't know what outcomes would or wouldn't have occurred if we had chosen a different path or acted in another way than what we did in the past. We tend to assume that things would have been better if a different decision had been made. We often don't consider the many ways that things could have actually been much worse. We've all heard stories about people for whom some type of tragedy was averted because something disrupted their plans, like someone who missed their flight and therefore didn't make it onto the airplane that later ended up crashing. We view those as serendipitous events and don't factor in the possibility of those as occurring for us along our own life path because there's no way to know about or account for them. So we rely on the very linear, concrete cause and effect analyzing that the brain does best to help us understand how we got to where we are now. That is a very narrow view and a limited perspective on our actual journey. Looking at regrets from a broader perspective and a more balanced one can often help us break out of that mindset we get stuck in that says, if only I had done such and such, I would be happier, more successful in a relationship, whatever. So if you find yourself having a hard time getting your brain off of that if only track, then present it with some other possibilities to try to offset that. You can respond to the if only I had stayed with my college sweetheart thought process with an alternative outcome like, oh, I might regret that I committed to someone when I was so young. Or, well, then I never would have dated John, who became a very good friend. If you have trouble coming up with alternatives, even saying, or maybe not, in response to your brain's speculative conclusions can help ease the extent to which it rigidly focuses on those as the answer to all of your problems. If regrets are seen as deficits in our lives, we'll feel like something's missing. When we recognize the benefits, we can appreciate their blessings. So rather than using regrets as cause for lamentation, leaving us stuck in the emotional pain of those if-onlys, we can use them as information that helps us understand ourselves and our experiences better. Then, instead of feeling like our previous actions and decisions caused lack in our lives, we can appreciate and amplify and hopefully even build on the benefits that those have brought to us. So let's look at some of the good that can come from regrets. Repair is one possible benefit. Now, I've already given examples of how we can take steps to address what we feel we have lost or missed out on because of past decisions. The work in those situations is to free ourselves from the misperception that our perceived mistakes in the past have somehow permanently held us back or negatively affected our lives in an irreversible way. But repair can feel more challenging when it comes to regrets about actions that have caused pain for someone else. In those cases, we assume responsibility for having adversely affected another person's life. This will be amplified if our actions ended our relationship with that other person, as we then have no way of knowing if they have recovered from the hurt that was caused. So when we dwell on those types of regrets, we struggle with the lack of closure on the situation. There may be things we wish that we had said or other action we wish we could have taken to help offset or heal the hurt that was caused. In fact, that can become a secondary regret, leaving us feeling badly about ourselves, not only with regard to whatever the original transgression was, but also because we failed to address it in ways that could potentially have softened the blow of our behavior for the injured party. I find that people can get hung up on what they perceive to be a lost opportunity to try to repair the damage that was done. I suggest it is never too late to acknowledge a hurt. Doing so might not lead to a reconciliation between you and the other person, but it might help you reconcile and make peace with what happened within your own mind and heart. And if the other person is receptive to re-engaging with you in some way, be careful not to create the expectation in your head that the only acceptable outcome would be for things to go back to the way they used to be. Things don't have to be exactly how they were in the past in order for us to feel okay about how they are now. That's just the brain holding on to that rigid solution it has come up with to resolve the problem. So it is important to approach this effort to make amends with no expectations at all. The other person doesn't owe you forgiveness or even a response for that matter, and the goal of acknowledging the hurt you caused is not to try to secure those from them. When there is no feasible way to directly acknowledge the hurt, Perhaps because you don't know how to contact the other person or because they have passed away, it doesn't mean you have to stay stuck in this regret. Writing a letter that expresses all of the things that you wish you could communicate to them can be a powerful tool to help repair your own pain about the situation. And remember that as you reflect on that time in your life, you are viewing it as the person you are today, not who you were back then. So if you start feeling angry or upset with yourself, keep in mind there was no way the person you were at that time in your life to have known what you know now, even if you think you should have known better. Can you get in touch with whatever emotional struggles that younger you might have been going through at the time that caused them to act in a way that created pain for someone else? Can you connect to how badly that younger version of you feels about what happened and recognize they've been carrying shame and guilt from that situation all this time? Is it possible to respond with compassion to those challenging feelings, just as you would to a close friend or loved one who is struggling to come to terms with something they've done? Experiences are another benefit that can come from the things we regret. Many times the situations that we struggle to accept have provided some type of experience for us that we might not otherwise have had. It might feel like an unpleasant experience and one we wish we could have avoided, but the experience itself may be one that ends up positively transforming our lives in some way. Let's take the example of a drunk driving arrest. Obviously, that is not something anyone would want to go through, and there are many painful feelings and challenges that go along with that situation. I have heard many people say that having that happen was a significant turning point in getting them to face and take action about their problem with alcohol. And if a drunk driving arrest leads someone to choose to get sober, well, that very likely has prevented a much worse outcome, such as a fatal accident, from occurring in the future. Whatever the experience might be, painful breakup, getting fired from a job, going through cancer treatment, anything else that was emotionally challenging, there was likely something beneficial that happened for you as a result of going through that experience. So growth is another benefit that can come from the things we regret. When you reflect back on something from the past that you are having difficulty accepting, try to recognize how going through that enabled you to grow in a beneficial way. Some of the most valuable lessons that we learn evolve out of painful experiences that we've gone through. Maybe going through cancer treatment taught you the importance of self-care and enabled you to learn to ask for and accept help from others. We don't tend to see the potential for that growth in all of those opportunities while we are in emotional pain, since the brain views pain as a signal to quickly identify and fix the cause of it, so the pain will go away. As I've talked about many times, emotions occur to provide information, and allowing ourselves to fully experience them enables us to learn and grow from them. If losing your best friend because of something you did ends up helping you learn how to be a more compassionate, collaborative, considerate person to others in future relationships, that's a very valuable lesson. Resolve can also come from regrets. If a poor decision we've made motivates us to do the necessary work so that we never do that again, that is a very positive outcome from an upsetting situation. Taking the example of the drunk driving arrest, the person may resolve to never put themselves or others at risk by getting behind the wheel of a car after drinking. And if that leads to the person seeking treatment, attending AA meetings, and healing whatever was causing them to use alcohol, what an amazing gift that arrest becomes. Empathy for others is another hidden treasure that we can find within our regrets from the past. When we reflect on behavior that has been hurtful to another person, we can choose to learn as much as we can about the situation in order to hopefully prevent that from happening again in the future. So as we examine ourselves in order to figure out the work we need to do, we will have to consider what the other person experienced as a result of our hurtful action. Empathy is the ability to sense other people's emotions and to imagine what someone else is thinking or feeling. When we can truly appreciate how our actions affect others, that can help us be more proactively aware and mindful of that moving forward. As challenging as it may feel to connect with and understand the pain that our behavior caused, That facilitates an increased capacity for empathy that we can use to guide us in future interactions and relationships. And of course, in order to do this effectively, it's important to connect to your heart so your brain doesn't turn this into a problem solving exercise or another round of self blame. You also deserve empathy and compassion for the impact that your past behavior has had on you. Thankfulness can also develop from regrets. When we do the work to recognize experiences, growth, and other gifts within our regrets, we can shift out of guilt, shame, and self blame to appreciating the benefits and blessings that came from those painful experiences. We tend to see those challenging feelings as an appropriate consequence for hurtful behavior, which then becomes a life sentence we think we have to serve. Living in perpetual self punishment benefits no one. If instead we let the painful emotions attached to our regrets guide us to the internal processing and healing and outward behavioral change that is there for us to do, that can only help us be better for ourselves and in relationship to others moving forward. Isn't that the ultimate atonement? Take care. Have a good week.